Now is the time we get to get into some kind of nuts and bolts about best practices for remote instruction. So first thing we want to talk about are the problems and challenges. So what problems and challenges have you already faced with online instruction that is particular to that setting? When you think of teaching remotely, teaching online, what are some challenges that you face as compared to, teaching in a classroom or in person?
There's just less feedback. You never know if they can't see, if they've been staring at something that's not what I wanted them to see and they don't talk about it. Like I've had that in person, but it can be easier to do in Zoom sometimes. And then just the feedback that the cameras will go off, no verbal. I'm a performer, so I like to get a lot of feedback, and that's lacking a lot of times on Zoom. So
trying to transfer engagement. I think that that social engagement into an online setting, and particularly one that lasted extensively with the pandemic. That was probably the hardest thing, keeping students engaged throughout the course, no matter whether it was an 8-week course. I had several 8-week courses and some courses that were just online for the full semester. Yeah. I mean, we learned to use some of our education strategies online, how to change them to make them fit, but it was a tough one.
You have to adapt to survive, right?
And then I also had a hard time even using the breakout room. Then I can attend one group, then totally don't know what their other group is doing until I visit to their room. And then sometimes I forgot keep tracking my time, and then I'm spending too much time in the one group and then jumping to the next group and then only have a 30 second. And then, that kind of the time management is a very difficult. But it won't have such problem much for as in-person small group discussions.
Yeah. So it's very different from in the classroom. You say, okay, everybody get into groups and you can wander around the room and listen in on this group and this group. And you can do that very quickly. And being in person, you get those visual context clues, feedback, like Kirsty was talking about. You know whether or not what you're presenting is hitting home or not, or if they're just missing it entirely, or in the virtual space, if they're even paying attention at all, you're not getting that feedback. So absolutely, these are all things that we've experienced through the pandemic. But I want to bring up some that I think we're all aware of these things, but it's nice to see them all listed so we know that we're not missing anything. Technical issues. Like I have technical issues still with using breakout rooms. Did I get people in the right room? Okay, wait, I got to move this person. And that takes time too. But also somebody dropped out of the call, or I can't get my microphone to work, or I can't get my speakers to work. Those sorts of things happen all the time. Physical issues, like we talk about Zoom fatigue, right? Eye strain, that's a very real thing. People get headaches from sitting in a class too long. And if we have students in back-to-back online courses, we're wearing them out and just sitting in front of a screen. There's also inequality, things that they need to be considered. Not all students have the same access to technology and internet and just even a quiet space to meet virtually without distractions. And also, to the point about people not feeling comfortable about sharing things that are personal about them, they may be subconscious about where they're coming from physically into that virtual space. Does my background, is it somewhat embarrassing? Do I not want people to see what I have going on in my home, for example? Which is kind of nice what they have these new features of blurring things out. But, the opposite end of that spectrum is if I'm looking at my other classmates and I see that they live in really, really nice, expensive apartments and homes that, that I might feel a little self-conscious about my measly little apartment that I share with 6 other people. And I'm, working 3 jobs to make it through college. There's a lot of things that we really should think about. Where are our students coming to us from, and what are inequality issues that might need to be addressed in a virtual space? How can we neutralize some of those, level the playing field? Those are all things that we need to consider going into a virtual exchange situation. And also thinking about, since we are talking about virtual exchange, inequality between those of us here at Purdue and our students being here at Purdue versus students at another institution in another country. Are we hosting this virtual exchange in our bright space, and the people in Germany or Japan, they're guests in our platform and they're not familiar with it, they have trouble accessing it? There's inequality there too. So there's things that need to be addressed. Maybe we need to find a third party kind of platform that neither one of our groups are familiar with, that's kind of neutral territory that we're all learning to use together. Confusion about coursework. And this comes also just as a byproduct of being in a virtual space, not having that feedback. It's not just for us as teachers. The students also need that feedback of, am I doing this right? Am I following the instructions properly? If I'm in a classroom, I can just raise my hand and ask a question real quick. But if I'm doing asynchronous work, I can send an email, but it might take a couple hours, a day before I get a response. So how can we address issues around the coursework we're asking our students to complete that eliminates confusion as much as possible? And then you also all picked up on this kind of social isolation, lack of teacher presence. So if our students feeling disconnected from us, oftentimes the instructor is this disembodied voice behind a PowerPoint sometimes in remote instruction. So how do we address that? So what are some creative ways to address some of these challenges? Because you all have been doing this ever since the pandemic hit. How have you addressed some of these? Let's think go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
One thing I felt myself, especially during the pandemic, needing to do is to be much more understanding. I have no idea what the students were experiencing, and some people just disappeared, or would surface later, and that would be major consequences in other times. But I think I tried to see them as humans more. That sounds terrible. I tried to be, I barely learned their names sometimes. And so I had to make a conscious effort to reach out and say, are you okay? Let's meet outside of this class time and try to make some sort of make up for the limitations of not being together as people a lot of times. So I would try to reach out to people who also had that student that maybe someone disappeared, and try to, I didn't care about grades as much, just more about the people if I could.
Yeah, I certainly think that the pandemic impacted a lot of us in a similar way, that I think everyone's empathy grew somewhat, and we started to shift. And talking about values, we started to shift away from being so stringent about task and activity, more towards people and relationships, because we're all going through a pandemic, right? I think that's a natural transition, but it is also a byproduct of the virtual space. If they're in your physical classroom or not, that's a direct cue. You can read them and see, are they okay? And if I don't see them for a few weeks, I know I need to follow up with them. But a virtual space, it's much more challenging.
I think I did
sorry, go ahead. You could go.
I did kind of the similar to making them connected, for try to send more individual email to the student outside of the class, just like for, hey, this is the things that you said and you're interested in, and here is some additional information for this, or just for tied to the coursework, but also, checking with them and then personalizing the connection so then they feel connected. In terms of the tech things, technical issue, I pay more attention to my organization, the organization of the course website, and then the student will easily follow and then find the information what they need. So I learned that, I had to develop my tech skills a little bit, and then I needed help from their instructional designer, and then try to ask for the help to have a better just organization. And then, so for our virtual exchange program, we end up with the thinking of all the access and then also the cost. We decided to use Google Classroom to our platform for the virtual exchange. And then luckily, I have the professor who experts in tech. So it seems like I'm nicely set this time for ready to go for our program.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are some really great solutions, and they address a few things in there. You know, we're talking a lot about connecting to our students on a personal level. Confusion about coursework is being addressed in your website, but we definitely want to be much more explicit in our instructions, giving them kind of step-by-step, easy to follow things. But there's also other strategies. Like one of the things I tried to emulate in my Brightspace is, you know, we have this regular pattern of warm up, read, watch, meet, reflect, warm up. And it's the same way in every module. So having things be in a pattern or make it easy for students to anticipate what's coming next, that helps them realize very quickly what's expected of them and what to do next. So there's less anxiety about what's coming next, and there's less confusion about what they're supposed to do. So there's a lot of different ways you can address these things. So yeah, so I've got here some notes, learner guides, keeping a predictable rhythm, module roadmaps, transparent assignments. So you tell them what it is you're wanting to get out of them from a particular assignment. But also, you know, as regards connecting, there are things like creating space for students to interact that isn't graded. You know, so Brightspace has that automatically. When you set up discussion boards, it already has a discussion board set up, which is just for students to interact with one another and engage with one another in a kind of a social setting. But you can set up other social spaces. You can have a Facebook page for your program or course. So those are other options as well. I'm going to skim through a few of these other slides, especially since, you know, I've got some educators here, so you all might be more familiar with these than I am. But there are different pedagogical approaches to consider. Community of inquiry, which you know, focuses on social, cognitive, and teaching presence as well. Being student-centered, you know, allowing the students to kind of direct the path that they're going to take in their education. Universal design. So why are we learning this? What is it that we're learning? How are we learning this? And then also transformative learning can also be very helpful, looking through the process and perspective transformation, the psychological, which is changes in understanding of self, convictional revision of belief systems, and behavioral, which is a change in behaviors or lifestyle. And then we're going to talk a little bit about challenge and support a little bit more, and backward design. Again, if you all have questions about any of this at any point, please feel free to interrupt. So backward design, there are 7 elements here, but it's really the 3 kind of compact everything together. And that's, we're going to start with, what are the goals? What do we want our students to learn? What is the learning outcomes we want them to have at the end of our program? What do we want them to be able to do? How are we going to measure that? So number 2 is, what's the assessment that we're going to use? And then finally, once we've identified those first 2, then we can begin to select what are the specific activities and interventions that I'm going to give them that's going to help them practice whatever that competency is, or for my learning outcomes, right? So what is the activity that I'm going to design or find and use, or worksheets, things like that. I often like to point out to, you know, that when I'm talking to people from the College of Education, yes, this is called backward design, but really it's just proper design. You should always start with what you want them to know in the end and work backwards. That's the best approach. Talking about challenge and support. So it's based on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. But Sanford came up with this very simplistic view of how we're, you know, educating our students. Is they have inherent challenges, their own challenges. They have challenges of the context of what they're learning, and then how we, understanding those challenges, determine how we support them and to what degree, right? Because we really want them to get out of their comfort zone and to get into this very narrow learning zone where they're pushing themselves, but we don't want to push them so far they go over into the panic zone and then completely shut down. We want them to kind of dip a toe into the panic zone, but also support them and give them the tools to manage themselves, that if you are feeling panicked, if you are feeling overwhelmed, go back to your comfort zone, recoup, and then get back into the learning zone as quickly as you can. So there's a lot of ways to do that. So I've got these two questions. Does the virtual context present more or less challenge in cultural engagement? And this is not a trick question. I'm not trying to trip anybody up.
I think that's my overarching question. I see it as presenting more challenge because I think in my experience and in my mind, I see cultural engagement strictly from a study abroad perspective, where you go, you see, taste, feel, experience the culture, you're embedded in the culture. And when I see the virtual context, it's like there's a barrier there to fulfilling all of that. And so how do you then begin to break down that barrier? And as you were talking, and I think about this notion of, when I think about Vikasi's perspective, how do I apply that in a cultural setting or to support cultural competencies? I think one of the things you have to do is learn how to adeptly use the technology to bring students in from individual consideration or activities to group activities where there are pair activities where they're sharing their emotions, feelings, if they feel comfortable, to then going out of that into a more individual, now right from your heart, and see how you have grown from that first encounter to then sharing your encounter with a peer to now where you are as a person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of times these virtual spaces, especially when we're talking about presenting new cultural concepts, it almost becomes this clinical, here's some facts about this culture, but we're not really engaging with it. So how do we bring it to a personal level? So you're absolutely right. Those are things that need to be addressed. And to Yukiko's question earlier about how do we help our students feel comfortable talking about some topics that maybe aren't comfortable? So we have to kind of lay that groundwork of building trust with our students. And that's really challenging to do in a virtual space, right? So how do we do that? How do we have those conversations? So definitely, I would agree, virtual context presents more challenge for our students and more challenge for us to bridge that digital divide. So what does support look like in a virtual context, and how is it different from face-to-face? And you all have already actually given some examples of how you support your students from a remote virtual space.
Yeah, I think making just a practical thing that I think has helped is allowing students to back channel in the chat and go into breakout rooms, and not just be, I'm in my little listening booth and it's just a one-way channel, but you are here together and can ask each other things and clarify stuff in the chat. I'll say, like, you can put questions and ideas and talk about these things in the chat. There's nothing wrong with that. And just little ways to open that up. Also, having students play a leadership role sometimes, like in warning them this is going to happen, but giving them the responsibility to lead particular parts of the activities makes it, I think, less high stakes for, because sometimes they'll get, in a small group and be honest and say, I don't know what this is. And so we stop and can address that more easily than it's just me talking the whole time. Absolutely.
So the dynamic engagement goes a long way to supporting our students. And, some students might see that as a challenge in itself. Oh, I got to do it this way, or I got to do it that way. But for some students, that's really kind of letting them off the hook and allowing them, if we're having a live class discussion in Zoom, but I'm allowing some students to, if you prefer to use the chat, use the chat. This is just another means to express yourself, and you feel more comfortable doing it that way. That's an accommodation. That's a way of supporting our students. Giving them roles in different activities. more clearly defines what's expected of them. You're clearly defining expectations for them, and even limiting what those expectations are, so they're easy for them to manage instead of having a long list of things that they have to do in a particular class setting. So those can also be ways to support. But also, you mentioned emailing students and just checking in with them, right? Supporting them emotionally also becomes a part of this. So I'm trying to be mindful of the time, and I've got a whole bunch more stuff to share with you all. So I'm just going to skim through some of this stuff, and I'll kind of stop on some things that I think maybe would be helpful based on what I was reading in some of y'all's comments in Brightspace. So I do want you to think about how you're designing your programs, your courses, and what resources you use, as well as strategies. And there are a bunch of resources in there. And Yukiko, you brought this up about using breakout rooms and the challenge of knowing what they're talking about. And you can go into one, but then you don't know what's going on with the others, and you got to go back out and go into another one. There's actually a website out there, and the name of it is not coming to me right now, but I believe I've listed it as one of the tech resources in the module. But what it is it's a virtual space, and what you have on your screen is it's like a virtual room. There's little tables distributed around that virtual environment on your screen, and you can assign students to specific tables, and they take their avatar and they just drag it over to that table. And then when all the other students in their group come to that table, it actually turns off all the other little screens of all the other students in the class, and they only see each other's, and they only hear each other. So it's like they're in a breakout room, but it all is triggered by this kind of moving an avatar around. So you, as the teacher, you can actually virtually move your avatar from one group to the next and listen in. And as you approach a virtual table, their volume comes up and you can hear what they're talking about. And as you move away, their volume goes down, and then you can go to the next group, and it does the same with each. So that might be something to check out, because it's a much more kind of organic, similar to the real life setting in a classroom, that would allow you to more quickly transition from one group to the other and listen in. So that's a really neat thing. I haven't got a chance to use it myself, but I've seen some demos, and it's really interesting. I think it might have a cost associated with it though. So, if I can remember the name, I'll send you an email of what it is. So there are different resources and strategies out there. And there's a lot of apps and technologies that have been created, especially through the pandemic, to help us all out with that. So some tips and strategies. And a lot of these have to do with connecting to our students, but also eliminating confusion. So showing up for class. So having a scheduled time, even if it's just like virtual office hours, where I'm going to be in my personal Zoom room. If anybody wants to log in at any time, you can come in and ask me a question. That's one way you can support your students. Put yourself in their shoes, so try to anticipate any confusion that might come up. So take another read of your instructions on an assignment. Are they really clear? Or is there something in there that might be misunderstood, and can you make it clear? As Chrissy, as you pointed out, giving roles, empower students to take charge of their learning. And this is that student-centered approach as well. If they express interest in a topic, try to be flexible and let them pursue something that maybe you didn't have already planned for them. And then also we talked about dynamic engagement. Consider how students like to learn on their own and how they like to engage. Infuse your writing, especially if you're using a virtual platform or a web page. Try to put in your own personality. I used it's kind of corny, but I put an emoji at the beginning of my Brightspace. But that's just, inject a little humor, a little bit of informality. At least for American students, they tend to appreciate that, even if they maybe think it's corny at first as well. But there's different ways to do that. You don't have to use emojis, but one thing is you can create a welcome video for your students. I've seen instructors that have done that. Welcome to my class, and they actually shot the video in their home. This is my home. These are my hobbies. This is my family, introducing their kids, just to give some personal connection to their students. Because again, otherwise you're this disembodied voice behind a PowerPoint that they don't connect to, right? Organizing content intuitively, visual appeal, all of these things. You can also add into this your asynchronous components, things that students are going to engage with, that will make it more engaging for them and easier to connect. There are some of these books out there. We had some of the articles that you all read in Brightspace already. This one I particularly like, except for, what was it? 12, move that to the top. Don't put it down at number 12. Start with your learning outcomes. But again, these are just kind of summarizing some of the things that was listed on the other one. But this is a nice table that lists some things as you're designing your course. Pre-course materials can be very helpful. So FAQs or Q&As, social forums, like I said, an orientation video or a welcome video. Having students create their own introductory videos. We did that with the flip at the beginning of Brightspace. But just give them a glossary of terms, give them the netiquette rules about turn your microphone off when you're not talking, keep your camera on. Little things like that can be very helpful before the class even starts. When you're lesson planning for your live sessions, try to incorporate these things, thinking about how you're introducing the topic, how you're getting them into group work or small groups or study groups outside of class, and then how you're facilitating discussion. These are all things you want to plan ahead and really kind of, as much as possible, keep this regular rhythm or pattern to your instruction so students know what's coming next. Lesson planning, both synchronous and asynchronous components. And there's different kind of tools that you can use. So in the synchronous setting, you can use a live webinar class, but you can also have student instructor meetings, right? Where you just meet with them one-on-one or in small groups. And then of course you can have chat rooms about that go alongside or using the chat during your instruction as well. Asynchronous, you can start using weekly announcements. So here's what's coming this week. You can have pre-recorded micro lectures. In fact, I do want to offer, Silmar has a series of micro lectures called PIMS, Portable Intercultural Modules. These are things that we've created in Brightspace. If you see one that you like, you can actually embed it in your course and the students engage with it right there in Brightspace, and it has an intercultural component to it. So that's something you might want to check out that we've actually created and offered for you, make it available to you. Definitely you want to have prompt feedback, but then of course, then you have to define what prompt means. Is it the same day, the next day, 72 hours? And the same thing with discussion boards, how you're engaging with discussion boards and how you're using discussion boards can have different levels of effectiveness. So with that in mind, thinking specifically about discussion boards, here are some things to consider that help these things run more smoothly to better facilitate discussion in discussion boards. Both how you're asking them to interact and how you're interacting with them as well. Don't worry if you're not going to get all of this. I am making the PowerPoints available in the modules. So after this, I'll upload this workshop PowerPoint to the module. So if you all want to get any of this information, you can retrieve it later on as well. So coming to the end, and I do want to have some time for discussion, but I do want to remind you all that after we meet today, you'll need to go back to module 2 and do that post-workshop reflection. And also explore the resources section, which is down below that reflection section. That's where I put a lot of these technological resources, but also pedagogical resources as well. And then you'll, of course, want to begin working on the next module. If that's module 3 or module 4, you want to go ahead and start working on that now. So with the last 8 minutes, I want to kind of open this up. Thoughts, ideas, do you want to share some of the resources you've used, some of your approaches, or do you have questions?
I have a question, and you alluded to it in the beginning, and I think Christy and I would like more information. So is there a possibility for us to share Brightspace with our colleagues? And can we get more information on what that entails? And is there anyone, and I don't know, Yukiko, if you're doing that now, you're using Google Classroom. Okay, because Christy knows I don't like Google Classroom. So I would like to know, Yukiko, from you, if Google Classroom is probably the better option for us at this point. But I'm curious, because that was our stumbling block in trying to figure out how do we get the kids, and I'm sorry, I used the word kids, forgive me there, the students engaged what platform do we use? We use their platform, our platform. What are the issues in deciding whose platform to use, and what will produce support if we choose to go with Brightspace?
I'll let Yukiko start on that one.
Well, we don't know how it's going to work for the Google Classroom at this point yet. So our program will start from this October, and then we are setting that. Programs, I mean, the website right now, platform right now. So I can definitely share. You said you guys have started from spring, right? No?
We started in the spring, and we stopped our discussions at the platform. So we're trying to figure out if Brightspace on Purdue's end is the better platform for us, and then how do we get those students in Germany and their instructors access to it, particularly the instructors access to it in the next couple of weeks while we start to build the course.
Mm-hmm.
That's our concern.
No, so that's the kind of the discussion we already had, and then so because it's a free, access to have, and then we also looked for the dance suggestion for the virtual classroom with that, so then it's cost money. So for us, and then we decided to a cheaper option, which is a Google Classroom, and then we decided to get because students are able to create their own Google account, and it's free of charge, and they know that they are already familiar with the Google, and then kind of know their some of the additional functions for the chat, and then Google Hangout and those communication tool. So that's why we decided to go to the Google at this point. But I don't know how it's going to work. And then first meeting, the professor from Japan is setting up their platform for us. So we will know how it looks like. And then I'm happy to, share the information, whatever I got at the end of this month, that we will finish setting up the course. So.
Thank you, Yukiko. Appreciate that. To your question, Crystal, about can we get external participants into Brightspace? Yes, you can do that. That is something I've done a number of times. You do have to go through Teaching and Learning Technologies, the wing of ITAP. They can set up a Brightspace course page that allows external registrants. There is a one-time fee associated with it. I think it's $275. But it's a one-time fee, so you don't have to pay per
For every person or for
no, just to set up the Brightspace course.
Okay. And you said it's a one-time fee. So once we get the course set up in Brightspace,
it doesn't matter how many people you add to it.
okay, and then will they charge us the fee every semester we offer the course? So if we come back in a year, spring of 24, will they charge us $275 or whatever to offer the course again?
Probably, yes. Now, there is the possibility. So one of the things I do is I tell them up front, I don't want my Brightspace page restricted to a particular semester. I want it to remain open and not be tied to a particular calendar.
Okay.
So that might be a way to kind of get around that. But then you've got to deal with people you're enrolling and disenrolling. I don't know if that's a feasible solution. But yeah, each time you create a new course shell, you would have to pay that $275 fee.
So then, like, how on our end as instructors, when we put in our course request, right, where our ITAP already makes a shell for us for that course that we're going to be teaching. So if we are the instructors of record for this course, let's say for spring 2023, then we would still have to pay the $275 to let the Germans come in and be part of it. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if they can take an existing shell and change it to allow people in, and that's where the cost, or because the way I've always done it is they've set up the shell as a new thing from scratch that allows people to register. And they will also help with, they have like a form email that goes out to people. You just give them the email addresses you want it to go to. Excuse me. And that tells them you'll need to go to this link and you'll need to register. And then that will give you access to the Brightspace page. So they'll help you even with helping them. Of course, it's going to be in English, but with German students, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
And something else to consider is you may want to look at getting your German peers, the other professors over, is it Leibniz? Is that where? You may want to see about getting them access to at least one of your current Brightspace pages so they can get in and look around and have an idea of what they're getting their students into, and make that part of the conversation too. So getting them an early glimpse into that.
Okay.
But certainly, if that is the decision, we're going to use Brightspace, we're going to, set it up with teaching learning technology so that we can have the students in Germany register and get into that, have access to that. You definitely want your German peers to be working with you on designing the space and putting it together. Any other questions? These are great questions, by the way. I think last year I was like, come on, guys, pulling questions out of them like, oh, we don't even know what to think about. You guys have already started thinking about these things. So
I'm going to throw out a research question. I'm thinking about my colleagues in the College of Education, that maybe we could write a paper on this, given that I don't know how much research is on those. Another article you provided for us on virtual cultural exchanges, but putting the program together from scratch, to me, sounds like a valuable paper we could possibly work on together. Do you know of any literature or research that looks at the intricacies of 3 different people or however many people trying to put together a virtual exchange program and looking at their own positionality and cultural competencies and how that impacted the way that they went about establishing their goals and outcomes for their particular courses? I'm just curious without having to do a Google search.
yeah, I have a general sense and awareness of that kind of research has been going on. I don't have anything specific to point to. Andrea, if you do, feel free to jump in. But COIL programs have been around for years, and those types of collaborations and really virtual exchange and COIL kind of has always been a realm where people are creating programs from scratch and co-creating them with international peers. So, like I said, I don't have a specific one to point to, but I can probably find some.
I'd say, Crystal, that that's certainly an idea to run with. The subjectivity of creating an experience for students and how our own, I think the language that I've seen in any particular research is about biases. And there are so many different biases to classify, but I certainly think it's an area that should be built up and go for it. I know that in terms of faculty research, as it applies to virtual intercultural activities, there is a thirst for knowledge, and there had been real gaps from the early onset of the programs with collecting data, and so there's certainly an opportunity there. And also in the Hubble, we're looking for that exact research. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, and I want to echo that, yes, there's some of this out there. Yes, this is definitely the type of thing that people will write about. But as Andrea has pointed out, there's not a lot of it. So there's definitely a desire to have more. There's a lot of space. There's a lot of gaps that need to be filled, both in intercultural competence in virtual spaces, intercultural competence in virtual spaces that are being designed from scratch, and biases and the specific intersectionality of the instructors and course creators. These are all areas that are going to have gaps that absolutely are wide open for publication and further research. So yeah, I would
just want to
definitely encourage that.
One more note, if I can say, I also think it would be very interesting to consider the context of being in Indiana itself, right? So this regional identification in the United States and what that means with engagement, whether that be international or domestic, because this is one of the conversations that's come up from an IEDI discussion was, what the context of intercultural competency looks like in the Indiana context, particularly in rural areas. And then what that means for a big college town where the college population actually supersedes the local population. So, that's going to be a true element for a lot of individuals who are engaging this, whether that be from the international side. So from the U.S. context, I think it would be very interesting to uncover that as well.
And if I can share our idea for doing what we are planning to do with our pilot is we are trying to make our the cycle of program development as a design-based research. So we are trying to get the data as much as possible from the student side as well as the instructor side. And then so possibly we as a part of the requirement as assessment, we ask the student to do the pre and post IDI, but at the same time, we will do pre and post like a reflection writing there with their own language, so then that they can say more about what they brought from at the beginning and what they learned at the end. But also we decided as an instructor to take some journal log to see how we interact with the student, as well as our thoughts through the process of the developing the course. That we are thinking as a rich data source as well. So we're thinking to save all the student chat and then also all the work submitted. But so that's why, the reading I got for this week is for agreement for all the data sharing. That is critical for us, and then which I totally forgot about doing that, thinking of it. So that's our plan.
That's really great, Yukiko, and I applaud you for taking those two approaches to collecting data. I think those are really great. Well, I do want to be mindful of the time. Thank you all so much for a great conversation today, and I look forward to even more in our next sessions. Have a wonderful day.